left the phone face down on the kitchen counter, and stood there for a long moment, staring at the magnolia tree in the backyard. It was my husband Walter's favorite. He planted it the spring we moved into this house, 31 years ago. Every April it bloomed like it was trying to outdo itself. Great creamy white flowers that you could smell from the driveway. Walter used to bring me a single bloom on my birthday every year without fail. He'd set it in a juice glass on the nightstand so I'd see it first thing when I woke up. Walter passed 2 Januaries ago. The magnolia still blooms every April. Nobody brings me flowers anymore. I stood there looking at that tree and I thought, very quietly to myself, they forgot to take me out of the group chat. My name is Nora. I'm 67 years old. I taught 4th grade for 28 years at Millbrook Elementary, right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I retired 6 years ago, and I'll be honest with you, retirement suited me. I took up watercolor painting. I joined a book club at the library on Tuesday afternoons. I started walking every morning, 3 miles down by the river, listening to whatever audiobook I'd downloaded the night before. I was doing fine. I wasn't lonely exactly. I had my friend Paulette, who I'd known since we were both young mothers, pushing strollers around the same neighborhood block. I had my garden. I had my routines. And I had my children. My daughter Melissa, 41, who lives about 20 minutes away with her husband and their 3 kids. My son Greg, 38, who lives on the other side of town with his wife and their 2 kids. 5 grandchildren total, ranging from 4 years old to 11. Carter, Lily, Bo, Sophie, and the youngest, little Wren, who just turned 4 in March and already has opinions about everything. I love those 5 children the way you can only love grandchildren, freely without the weight of daily discipline. Without the exhaustion of being the one responsible for every meal and every bath and every argument over screen time. I love them, and I love seeing them, and then I love handing them back. That last part is important. Remember that. I want to be fair when I tell this story, because I'm not interested in making my children into villains. They're not bad people. They were good children. Melissa used to leave little drawings on my pillow when she was small. Greg once saved up his allowance for 6 weeks to buy me a birthstone ring for Mother's Day. I raised them with love, and they love me back. I know they do. But somewhere along the way, I can't tell you exactly when, I became a resource. It happened gradually, the way most things do. First it was just, Mom, can you pick up Carter from school on Tuesday? Then it was, Mom, we have a work thing Friday. Can you take all 3 for the night? Then it was summers. Full weeks, multiple times. And I said yes. I said yes. Because I love those children, and I wanted to help, and I told myself that's what family does. After Walter died, it got worse. I think they assumed I had nothing but time now, that I was just sitting in this house, waiting to be useful. Melissa stopped asking if I was free and started telling me the schedule. Greg would text me on a Wednesday that he needed me Saturday. No question mark. No if you're available. Just the information, like a notification from an app. Last Thanksgiving, I cooked for 14 people. Melissa brought a store-bought pie and Greg brought beer. Neither of them helped clean up. I stood at the sink at 9:30 at night washing the good china by hand. I don't put the good china in the dishwasher, and I thought, I'm very tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but I kept saying yes, because they needed me, because the grandchildren needed me, because that's what I'd always done. That's the setup, and I wish I could say I saw what was coming. I didn't. It was the 2nd week of May when it happened. Melissa and her husband had gone out to dinner with Greg and his wife. Double date, a Saturday night. I hadn't been invited, which was fine. They're allowed to have adult time, I understand that. I wasn't sitting around feeling sorry about it. What I didn't know was that they had a group chat, a family group chat, all 4 of them. Melissa, her husband, Greg, his wife. No me, which is also fine. I'm not naive. I know adult children have their own conversations, except at some point, one of them, I never found out who, added me by mistake. Maybe they meant to add someone else. Maybe someone was on a new phone and their contacts got scrambled. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that the next morning, a Sunday, I woke up and had 47 messages I'd been copied on overnight. I almost didn't read them. I almost set the phone down and went to make my coffee. I didn't. The conversation had started innocently enough, discussing summer plans. Greg and his wife were talking about a trip they wanted to take. 2 weeks in Oregon, hiking, a road trip up the coast. Melissa and her husband had apparently been talking about Italy for 2 years and felt like this was finally the year. The kids were getting old enough, Melissa said. But then, and this is the part that made me sit down on the edge of my bed, the conversation shifted. Who's doing summer care for yours while you're in Oregon? Melissa had asked. Probably Mom, Greg wrote back. She's got nothing going on. We might need her too. If we do Italy, we'd need at least 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Just ask her. She'll say yes. She always does. And then Melissa, should we coordinate so she's not totally overwhelmed? Like, stagger the weeks. And Greg, or just do the same time. Get it over with. She can handle it. She used to teach 30 kids at once. There was a laughing emoji after that. I read it twice. Then I set the phone on the nightstand and I looked at Walter's side of the bed, which I still keep made up, covers smooth, pillow straight, because 31 years of habit don't stop just because a person is gone. She'll say yes. She always does. I thought about that for a long time. I want to tell you what that sentence did to me, because I don't think I have words for it exactly. It wasn't rage, not at first. It was something quieter and more unsettling, like realizing you've been walking through a room with a slanted floor and you only just noticed. Everything looked the same. But it was tilted. She'll say yes. She always does. Not Mom will be glad to help. Not let's ask her and see if she's free. Not even she loves having the kids. Just she'll say yes. A given. A fact. Like the sun rising or the cable bill coming due. I got up. I made my coffee. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the magnolia tree, and I thought about who I was before I became someone that people counted on to just say yes. I was a reader. I was a painter, even if just watercolors in the sunroom. I had wanted for 3 years now to take a proper art class, not a YouTube tutorial, an actual class with an actual teacher. There was a summer session offered every July at the Art Center downtown, 2 weeks long. Beginning to intermediate watercolor techniques. I had looked at the brochure 4 times. I had never signed up because it always seemed like the wrong time, because someone always needed something. I thought about Paulette, my friend. She'd been asking me for 2 summers to come stay with her at her daughter's lake house in Michigan for a week in July. Just us, she kept saying. We'll take the kayaks out in the morning and read on the porch in the afternoons and eat whatever we want for dinner. 2 summers, I'd said maybe, and then found a reason I couldn't. I thought about the fact that I was 67 years old, and the magnolia was blooming, and Walter wasn't here, and I had been spending my free time being managed. That was the word that arrived in my mind, very suddenly, managed. They weren't asking me. They were managing me, planning around me like you plan around the weather. Not with malice, but with a certainty that I would simply cooperate, like a reliable element in their equation. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup. And I thought, I am going to do something different this summer. I didn't respond to the group chat. I didn't let on that I'd seen a single message. I just quietly, carefully, did not take myself out of it, so I'd see if anything else came through. 2 weeks later, Greg called. Hey, Mom. Cheerful, easy. So we've been thinking about doing a little Oregon trip this summer. 2 weeks, probably end of June into July. We'd love it if you could take Bo and Sophie for that stretch. 2 weeks. 5-year-old Bo and 8-year-old Sophie. End of June. Let me check my calendar, I said. There was a small pause. I think he was surprised. I'd never said that before. Oh, sure, of course, he said, a little uncertain. I'll let you know, I said. I could hear him recalibrating. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey. I'll look and get back to you. I called Paulette that same afternoon. Is that lake house offer still open? I asked. She screamed. Genuinely, she screamed into the phone. Nora. Yes. When? Tell me when. I called the art center downtown. The July session still had 2 spots. I registered that day, paid in full, non-refundable. Then I called my doctor, because I'd been putting off a checkup for 4 months, and made that appointment too. And I made a hair appointment. And I called the library and signed up for the summer reading program they do for adults, because I'd always thought that sounded nice, and always found a reason not to. I built my summer. I built it around what I wanted, for the first time in I couldn't tell you how long. And then I called Greg back. I looked at my calendar, I said. I'm sorry, I'm not available. End of June, I have plans. The silence on his end of the phone lasted longer than any silence I'd heard from my son since he was 15, and I'd caught him lying about where he'd been on a Friday night. Plans, he repeated. Yes. I've got some things I've been looking forward to. Can you? He cleared his throat. I mean, what kind of plans? We were really counting on you. And there it was, counting on you, without asking, without checking, just counting. Greg, I said gently. You didn't ask me. You assumed. And I understand that's become the pattern. But I have a life too, and this summer I've made commitments to myself. Another silence. Then, okay. Okay. We'll figure something out. He didn't sound angry, just bewildered, like I'd told him the sky was a different color than he'd always believed it to be. 3 days later, Melissa called. Same song. Italy. 10 days in August. I figured we'd drop the kids with you while. I'm not available in August either, I said. This time the silence was shorter, and what came after was less bewilderment and more cool. Mom, we've been planning this trip. I think that's wonderful. I hope you have a beautiful time. But who's going to watch the kids? I want to tell you that I said this next part with love, because I did, and I want to be clear about that. Melissa, that's something you and your husband need to work out. They're your children. I love them enormously, and I would love to see them this summer, on some terms we can all plan together and actually agree on ahead of time. But I can't be the solution to a plan that was made without including me. I could hear her breathing. I don't understand, she said finally. I know, I said. We can talk more if you'd like, but I'm not changing my summer plans. There were a few weeks in there that were uncomfortable. I won't pretend otherwise. Melissa was cooler than usual on the phone. Greg texted instead of calling, which he only does when he's trying to keep emotional distance. His wife sent me a message that I thought was meant for someone else, something about how she guessed they'd be paying for a sitter all summer, which, fine, yes. That's how it works when you choose to take a vacation. Paulette came over one Sunday afternoon, and I told her everything, over iced tea on the back porch, and she listened to all of it, and then she said, Nora, have you been in this house alone every summer for 2 years? I thought about it. Mostly, I said. She reached over and put her hand on mine. That ends this year, she said. And it did. The art class started the second week of July. There were 12 of us, retirees, a few younger folks, one woman who must have been 80 if she was a day, who painted the most fearless, explosive watercolors I had ever seen. The instructor was a man named Ray, patient and funny, who told us on the first day that the hardest thing about watercolor wasn't the technique, but the surrender, that you had to let the paint do things you didn't plan for and learn to love the result. I thought about that a lot. I drove to Michigan the last week of July. Paulette and I took the kayaks out every single morning, out on that wide silver lake in the early quiet, with the mist still sitting low on the water and the loons calling back and forth. We read on the porch in the afternoons like she'd promised. We cooked elaborate dinners together and ate them slowly. We stayed up too late talking about things we hadn't talked about in years, our mothers, our marriages, who we were at 20 and who we were now, and whether those two people would recognize each other. I hadn't laughed that much in 2 years, maybe longer. I called both my children once during the trip just to check in, just to say hello. The conversations were brief and a little careful, but they were warm. Nobody asked me to do anything. It was just talking, the way it used to be. When I got home, I sat on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea and looked at the magnolia for a long time. It was past blooming by then, back to just being a tree, green and full and patient in the August heat. I thought about something one of the women in my art class had said. Her name was Connie, and she'd driven 45 minutes each way every day because this class was the thing she'd wanted to do for 15 years and kept putting off. On the last day, she cried a little, happy tears, and said, I kept waiting for permission and nobody was ever going to give it to me. I understood that more than I could say. September came and things shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way of any big conversation or confrontation, just slowly, like a tide going out. Melissa called one evening, and she was softer than she'd been. She asked how my summer was. Really, asked. And I told her about the painting class and the lake house, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, That sounds really good, Mom. I'm glad. And I believed her. Greg and his wife had ended up booking a sitter for part of Oregon and asking his in-laws for the rest, which was apparently manageable when they actually planned around other people's lives instead of assuming. He came over one Saturday in September with Beau and Sophie, unannounced but in a good way, not dropping them off, just visiting, all three of them, and they stayed for lunch and helped me plant some bulbs in the front garden, and it was one of the nicest afternoons I'd had in a long time. He didn't apologize directly. Greg isn't someone who does things directly. But as he was leaving, he hugged me at the door, longer than usual, and he said, "We should do this more." "I'd like that," I said. I didn't point out that it was easier to enjoy each other when I wasn't being worn down by obligation. Some things are better received when they're felt rather than stated. Here's what I know now that I didn't let myself know before. Saying yes out of guilt or out of habit isn't love. It looks like love. It can feel like love for a while. But what it really does is teach the people around you that you don't have preferences, that your time belongs to whoever needs it, that you'll rearrange yourself to fit whatever shape is required. And eventually, they stop even thinking of you as someone with a shape of your own. I didn't know I'd let that happen. I genuinely didn't see it happening. I was busy being helpful and being needed, and those things can feel like purpose, which is easy to confuse with meaning. They're not the same thing. Purpose can be handed to you. Meaning you have to find. I found some of it in that watercolor class, in the feeling of a wet brush on wet paper, and the way the color blooms out into shapes you didn't draw. I found some of it on a lake in Michigan at 6 in the morning, with my oldest friend paddling 10 feet away from me and the whole world still and quiet. I found some of it in that September afternoon with my grandchildren's hands in the garden dirt. I'm not the same as I was last spring. I'm not harder, I don't think. Or maybe I am in the places that needed to be harder. I'm clearer. I know what I want and I know what I'll give, and I know the difference between the two, which I spent a long time not knowing. The magnolia is done for this year, but come April, it'll be back. Great white blooms, the smell drifting all the way to the driveway. Walter always said the best things are the ones worth waiting for. I think he was right. I'm just learning how to let myself be one of them. I'd been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any complicated way, just the plain, honest version of it. The idea that what we allow, we teach, and what we teach, we eventually live with. For years, I allowed my children to assume. I allowed the phone calls that weren't really questions. I allowed myself to disappear into other people's schedules until I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a plan that was purely my own. I didn't do it because I was weak. I did it because I loved them, and because somewhere along the way I confused being needed with being valued. Those two things can look identical from the outside, but they feel very different from the inside, especially at 9:30 at night when you're standing alone at the sink washing china that 30 people dirtied and nobody offered to help with. What I understand now is that the moment I read those 47 messages, she'll say yes, she always does, was not the moment something broke. It was the moment something became visible that had been there for a long time. And that's the thing about clarity. It doesn't arrive gently. It arrives like a light switched on in a room you've been navigating in the dark, and suddenly you can see exactly where all the furniture is and how many times you must have bumped into it without realizing. I made a choice that spring, not a dramatic one. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make speeches. I didn't issue ultimatums. I just quietly decided to treat my own time as something worth protecting. I signed up for that watercolor class. I called Paulette. I built a summer that belonged to me. And when Melissa and Greg called to tell me their plans, I told them, calmly and with love, that I had plans of my own. The discomfort that followed was real. I won't romanticize it. There were weeks of careful silences and cooler phone calls, and that particular kind of tension that lives in families when someone has changed the rules without warning. But here's what I've learned about discomfort. It's not the same as damage. Sometimes discomfort is just what growth feels like from the outside, before anyone has had time to adjust. Nora, that's me, and I'm allowed to talk about myself in terms of what I've earned. I spent nearly 3 decades teaching other people's children. I know something about what it means to raise someone well. You don't do it by never disappointing them. You do it by showing them, consistently, that people have limits and limits deserve respect. I just forgot, for a while, to teach my own children that lesson as it applied to me. The resolution in this story isn't about winning. Greg brought his kids over on a Saturday in September, and we planted bulbs and ate lunch, and it was easy in a way it hadn't been in years. Melissa called and actually asked how my summer was, and I could hear in her voice that she meant it. Those moments happened, not in spite of the boundary I drew, but because of it. That's the quiet cause and effect of it. When you stop making yourself endlessly available, the time people do spend with you starts to mean something again. Paulette told me something on that lake in Michigan, paddling back toward the dock in the early morning. She said the bravest thing a person can do sometimes is to want something for themselves out loud. Not secretly, not apologetically, just out loud. I'm still learning how to do that. But I'm learning, and the magnolia will bloom again in April, same as always. I'll be here to see it, on my own terms, in my own time, in this life that belongs to me.